Does spending 10 times the price on a GPU give you 10 times the fun? I don't know, I haven't made the video yet. So, yeah, let's do that now. Sometimes in life, it's worth spending more on stuff. You know, those things that are more expensive, but it's worth it because you get more bang for the buck. Or as I like to say, more show for your dough. Do you like my saying? Show for your dough? I made it myself. Help me spread it around, would ya? These are things that it's a good idea to spend more money on because you actually get something for the money. Now, there's lots of subjectivity with most things you can spend money on. People have different preferences for the way their phone works and the features they want, or the way their crackers taste, or the way their fancy wine sloshes around in their fancy wine goblets, or how soft their toilet paper feels on their bums. But there are some things in life where there really isn't any reason to choose one thing over another thing except for how they perform their function. And PC parts fall into this category. For the most part. I know that some people get enjoyment from having fancy looking shiny PC parts with RGB lights and impressive brand name logos or whatever. Not that I would ever waste my money on such frivolous things. When it comes to graphics cards, performance is what determines how much a GPU is worth. How much show for your dough? Actually, now that I hear it in a sentence, it doesn't sound that good. It needs work, I guess. But for GPUs, it's simple. How much FPS do you get compared to how much you spend? And really, it comes down to how much enjoyment do you get compared to how many dollars you had to spend to get it. Lucky for you, I find myself in the unique position to answer this question because right here, I have 3 GPUs, and each one costs 10 times the price of the other one. This one is an old Radeon R7 250, 2 gigabytes, which I got off someone on Facebook who was charging $10 for it, which I think is a fair price. This GPU here is the GTX 1650, which is a GPU I've had kicking around. I've used it for various things over the last year. This is the GDDR5 version of the card, by the way, and it's white because I painted it white. I made a video about that, by the way, link in the description below. It costs about $100 used. A bit more new, but is in the same ballpark. And finally, we have my RTX 3080, which I did spend about $1,000 on, back during the GPU scalpocalypse. It wasn't so bad though, because I got a fairly good deal on a bundle at the time. Realistically now, for the price, I should be able to get something better, like a 3080 Ti, or even a 3090, but for the purposes of this video, that's close enough. I'm gonna give these GPUs a test in a few games, and the goal is to see how much different the games feel. I know I could just run the benchmarks and get some FPS data and graph it on a chart or something, but I don't want to do that. I'm just gonna go by feel, because that's what we want to know. We want to know if spending 10 times the money gives us 10 times the fun. Which of these has the best show for your dough? Oh, now it sounds good again. Weird. Starting off with the R7 250, this GPU does not have updated drivers. I downloaded the latest drivers from the AMD website, which are back from 2018. Maybe that'll be an issue, maybe it won't, we'll have to wait and see. Our first game is going to be GTA 5. This is a bit of an older game, came out in 2015, and it's very well optimized, so it should at least run on even our old R7 250. I'm not just going to do a performance test, by the way. I'm going to record the FPS data on the screen, but I really just want to play the game and see how it feels. The FPS numbers tell one story, but if the game is fun and plays well, then the numbers don't really matter, do they? And, well, on the R7 250, it's not an unfun experience. I'm running at 1080p with the lowest settings, but it's actually sort of playable. We're getting 38 FPS. I mean, not amazing looking or the best playing experience, but for $10, this isn't so bad. This game is super well optimized though. It runs on almost anything. And considering how well it runs on weak hardware, I was actually hoping for more than 38 FPS. So this doesn't bode well for this GPU. I don't think it's going to do very well when we step up the demanding games. But for like older games, like GTA 5, anything lower than this, and here in GTA 5, this is tolerable and worth the price of admission. Now, with our GTX 1650, things get a lot more luxurious. We're still at 1080p, but I was able to go up to the high settings, so the game looks a lot better. And it's playing way better as well. we're getting a frankly opulent 103 FPS. Compared to the R7 250, this is a substantially better experience. But is it 10 times better? Well, I don't really know. It's definitely better, but 10 times? Yeah, maybe, now that I'm thinking about it. Because not only do the graphics look better, but on the R7 250 the frame rate wasn't great, but it's totally great here. This is more than playable. It's actually enjoyable. So yeah, going from our $10 GPU to our $100 GTX 1650 is definitely worth the price of admission in this case. Alright, time to pull out the big guns. RTX 3080 is overkill for this game. You know it, I know it. It makes no sense to buy an RTX 3080 just to play GTA 5. But hey, while we're here, let's not waste our potential. We're running at 1440p now, which is much more demanding. It's basically double the resolution of 1080p. Yes, 1440p is double 1080p. I made a video on resolution scaling, so watch that before you dare correct me in the comments. So, running at twice the resolution here, and we were able to completely max out the graphics settings, including all the advanced settings, like extended distance scaling, whatever that is. GTA 5 is one of those games that it runs great at lower settings, even on weak hardware, but when you crank those settings, it can still pose a challenge to powerful hardware. So at 1440p with max settings, we got 140 FPS. Very, very good. And the game looks freaking amazing. You won't get a better looking GTA 5 than this. Not without some serious graphical overhaul mods or whatever. So it looks way better, no doubt, but does it feel way more fun? I mean, I guess it depends on what you call fun. If most of the fun of a game for you is wandering around looking closely at how the light casts shadows on distant objects on your big 1440p monitor, then yeah, it probably is a lot more fun. But let's be real here. It's still just GTA 5. The game itself is barely any different than it was on the GTX 1650. When you're playing the game, you're not even going to remember to be impressed by the crisp resolution or the high-res shadows. As long as the game looks good enough and plays good, I don't think you're getting 10 times the fun by having fancy graphics. A bit more fun, no doubt, but 10 times the fun? Nope, no way. Not here at least. But GTA 5 is an old game, and not a very demanding game, so let's step things up a notch. Next game in our 3-game test is, yeah, you guessed it, Shadow the Tomb Raider, my favorite game to use for testing GPUs. Our R7 250 did not too great, not even a little bit. We're running at the very lowest settings, no anti-aliasing, at 720p with 50% resolution scale, which is about 500p, and we even disabled shadows, which makes the game pretty terrible looking, not gonna lie. And even with all that, we only got 19 FPS on average. I mean, do I even need to go into detail here? This is just gross. You're gross, R7 250. Lara Croft deserves better than you, you piece of garbage. So yeah, the GTX 1650 doesn't have to do much to impress us here. Compared to that R7 250, this is freaking beautiful. Running at 1080p with the medium settings, and we're getting a very playable and enjoyable 66 FPS. This is exactly where I'd want to be if I was trying to get my games looking good, not maxed out with psycho ray tracing or anything, but still looking decent. The GTX 1650 really is the sweet spot. And in terms of whether or not it's worth 10 times the price of the R7 250, well, considering that on that GPU the game looked like raccoon poop and played like my dead grandma trying to slam dunk a football, well, yeah, it's definitely worth 10 times more in this case. Not only because the game looks better, but we couldn't even freaking play it before. And now we can. 10 times the fun for 10 times the price? Yeah, it is. But what about the RTX 3080? Well, this is where the RTX features of our $1,000 GPU should allow it to shine, because Shadow of the Tomb Raider has ray tracing support. So not only can we run the game at 1440p instead of 1080p, and not only can we crank up the graphics settings to the max, but we can now enable ray trace lights and shadows. And Well, yeah, it does look great, and it runs great. We're getting 97 FPS on average, which is actually a very solid considering we're running at 1440p with ultra ray tracing and no DLSS. But is it really that much better looking on this $1,000 GPU with max settings compared to our $100 GPU with medium settings? I don't think so. I mean, it's nice looking, it's a bit better, but 10 times better? Not a freaking chance in heck, man. You guys know that I personally don't think ray tracing makes much of a difference at all to the visuals. I made a whole video on that topic, where I made the case that ray tracing is a waste of FPS and your money. But when I consider the massive price difference between the GTX 1650 and the RTX 3080, and considering the minuscule fun factor difference in running the game with slightly better visuals, I definitely do not think it's worth paying $1,000 for a GPU when you get a very good experience on the $100 option. Alright, on to our last game, and here's the thing. The R7-250 is an older GPU, and while it does support DX12, it does not get the full feature set, and usually GPUs with that limitation won't run certain modern games. God of War is one of those games. It didn't run on my older GTX 750 Ti, for instance, and I was expecting it not to run at all here, and then I could make fun of the GPU for not being able to even start the game. But to my surprise, it actually started up. That's where the good news ends though, because this was pretty much the worst gaming experience I've ever had. I turned all the settings down to the lowest, obviously. I ran at 720p with 50% resolution scale, which is like 360p. So it sort of feels like a retro game at these settings, like a Sega Saturn game or something. And even still, we weren't even close to a playable FPS. We averaged 12 FPS. It's basically a slideshow at this FPS. So, like, at some point, it doesn't matter how cheap the GPU is. If it can't deliver a playable experience, then you're not going to have any fun with it. So even just for 10 bucks, this GPU isn't going to give you any fun at all. In this game, at least. But our GTX 1650 does way better. Not only does it offer a playable FPS, it actually looks pretty good. Not amazing. The weaker hardware in the GTX 1650 is definitely struggling more in this title than any of the other ones, which makes sense. This is a very new game, less than a year old. It's a very good looking game too, but honestly, it's not too bad here. We're playing with the original preset, which is sort of like medium settings in this game, and we're running at 1080p, but we had to make use of balanced FSR 2.0. And the FSR 2.0 implementation in this game doesn't look great. It has a bit of ghosting and creates some graphical weirdness here and there. It's not bad. It gets the job done, and it plays just fine. Again, not great. We got 63 FPS on average, so it's not a face-melting super high FPS experience or anything, but I can play like this and have a good time. And considering how terrible the game ran on the R7-250, yeah, this is definitely a situation where spending 10 times the money gives you 10 times the fun.
Father?
But what about the high end? Well, on the RTX 3080, again, we're able to crank everything to the max. I'm running at 1440p with ultra settings, and we got 108 FPS on average. I mean, the RTX 3080 is a great GPU. It's got all the horsepower you need to run at 1440p with ultra settings, or even 4K if you make use of DLSS. And even with ray tracing, if you're into that sort of thing. And if playing at 1440p or 4K is really worth the expense for you, then you kinda need to spend the big bucks on a GPU that can drive those resolutions. But again, I just keep coming back to the value for the fun. The GTX 1650 cost me $100, and it gave me a good gaming experience in terms of graphics. The RTX 3080 cost me $1,000, and it gives me a great gaming experience in terms of graphics. But does great graphics mean more fun? No way. That's not what makes a game fun. The game itself, with the gameplay, the story, and the voice acting, and the artistry, and yeah, the graphics are part of it, but they're just one part. And spending 10 times the price on an RTX 3080 to make the graphics better doesn't add 10 times the fun to the experience. And it just doesn't seem worth it when you can get decent graphics on a GTX 1650 that costs you 1/10 the price. I think as long as you're playing the game at an enjoyable FPS with enjoyable graphics settings, then you're getting what you need to get. Adding some fancy graphics on top of all that is nice, no question, but does it make the game 10 times funner? No, it doesn't. Going from a mid-range to a high-end GPU is not nearly as much of a difference as going from a low-range to a mid-range GPU. As long as you have enough to enjoy the game, that's where you're going to get the most of your fun. And this is pretty much the situation no matter what game you're playing. To an extent, of course. If your mid-range GPU can't give you a playable experience at settings that make the game enjoyable for you, in whatever game you want to play, if it's really demanding, like Cyberjunk 2077, GTX 1650, if you want to play at 1440p, then yeah, you're going to have to go up to the high end. But those games are few and far between, to be honest. But, and that's a big but, there is something to be said for being able to get the most enjoyment out of a hobby you like. If having better graphics makes the game a bit more fun for you, and you're okay with paying more than a bit more money to get that fun, then hey, who am I to argue? You do you, buddy. Just keep your expectations in check. In modern games, don't expect to have much fun on an R7 250. Do expect to have some fun on a GTX 1650. Don't expect to have astronomically more fun on an RTX 3080. Spend what you can afford, enjoy the games you're playing at whatever settings you need to play them at, and don't fall into the trap of thinking you're missing out on something just because you don't have the latest and greatest tech toys. And don't forget, here's the silver lining. Today's flagship is tomorrow's mid-range. If you can exercise some patience, and in a few years, you'll get thousands of dollars worth of performance for just a few hundred. You just have to be patient. Be patient, damn it! And that brings us to the end. I must admit I fall into the category of gamer who feels like they're missing out if they don't have the latest hardware and is willing to spend extra to get that high-end experience. But I have no problem gaming on mid-range or even low-end hardware. And really, I just like playing games and having a good time. Graphics are only part of what makes a game fun after all. What are your thoughts on the matter? Do you have a super low-end GPU that you've still managed to have lots of fun with? What about a mid-range GPU that's still going strong? Or are you a high-end tech enthusiast that actually does get way more fun from their hardware, even though it costs you an arm and a leg and an ear and a toe, as my mom would say? I'd love to hear what you think about this topic in the comments below. And while you're down there, if you like the video, clicking that thumbs up button's all you gotta do. And subscribing, of course, so you don't miss any of my videos. As always, I'm TechDweeb. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.